Play on the field, the courts, and the ice is just one part of sports. Behind every game are the people hard at work so we can enjoy the action. They're the owners, administrators, agents, broadcasters, and promoters who bring the games to life. Meet them when you go behind the game with Patrick Klinger. Welcome to Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger, president of Agile Marketing Partners. My guest co-host today, well, he's kind of a big deal because he's the president and CEO of Highway Credit Union. He's a unrepentant Badger fan.
It's true.
And even despite that, he's still my friend. Dave Boden.
Thank you.
Dave, welcome to Behind the Game.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate it. I've done this once before with you. It's great. Maybe this is second career. Maybe I got a second career coming.
I like it. We also have another big deal on the show today. A gentleman who is is a very, very familiar face to most everybody in the Twin Cities. He's been a fixture on the media scene in Minnesota for over 3 decades. Mike Max, welcome.
Great to be with you. We go back a few years.
We
Patrick,
do.
yes.
We got a few stories between the two of us.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So it's great to have you here, Mike. I know we've talked before, but nice to get to know you a little better here today as well. As Patrick mentioned, you've been a fixture on the sports scene for as long as a lot of us can remember. Tell us about your journey kind of from being a young man in Gaylord to now where you're one of the most recognizable faces here in the Twin Cities.
Well, you know, I grew up playing sports and not really knowing beyond that. I knew I wanted to get a college education, and I knew that I wanted to play sports. My brothers played in high school and college. My dad was a high school coach before. He never coached us. He got out and got into the financial industry before I was in high school. But that's the environment that I grew up in. And then I went to Hamline University, where my mother attended, and I played basketball and baseball starting out. And I played baseball for 4 years and basketball for 1 year. Once I learned I wasn't quick enough to play basketball. But I had no intention of going into sportscasting because I didn't know anything about the industry or how it worked. And I took an elective class at the University of St. Thomas because we had a reciprocal agreement with St. Thomas and other schools, and it was in media productions. And the professor named Matthew Cantor said, you seem to thrive on the creativity part of this stuff, you know, taking videos and putting music with it and seeing what you can accomplish. She said, you should maybe look at exploring an internship. Well, I didn't know they existed, you know. She said, no, TV stations have internships, etc. So I started knocking on doors, and the only one that said yes was Channel 4. And that was only because, I thought it was a big deal at the time, but I found out later it was only because I wouldn't quit calling them. It had nothing to do with my resume or my ability.
There's a lesson there.
There's a lesson there. So I started there in 1986 as an intern, and I would say within the first 2-3 days, I said, this is what I want to do. I changed my major. I was majoring in business and psychology. They didn't have a communications major at Hamline, so my advisor, Dr. Pat Palmerton, and I sat down and we created my own major through an independent study. And so I might be the only telecommunications graduate from Hamline University, but she worked with me on that so I could get credit for the internship and for different independent studies that I could do. And I enjoyed it so much that during my that was my junior year, and during my senior year, I just kept coming in for free because I enjoyed it and I knew I wanted to do it. And as fate would have it, that was 1987. Well, they said, we don't have a job for you after I graduated, so I was looking for a job in the summer of 1987, and lo and behold, the Minnesota Twins caught fire. Yeah. And they decided to add programming to the Minnesota Twins because at that time we weren't owned by CBS, we could do what we wanted. And they said in September we're going to start doing a special Twins show after each game because people were just craving this coverage. And so they needed me to produce it. And that's how I got hired into the business. And I'm making a long story short here. And that's what really got me in as a paid employee. And then I worked from there. Midwest Sports Channel came along, which was also owned by CBS in the same building, and that was my godsend. That was what really lifted me, so I didn't have to go to another market and I could stay right here.
Mike, one of the benefits of growing up in a small community like Gaylord is that you always make the team. Right? Yep. You have a chance to play different sports. That's not the case in Eden Prairie or Wayzata. Right? So that must have been a pretty special experience for you as somebody who, athletics has been such a big part of your life.
Incredibly important for me. All 3 of my coaches are in the Hall of Fame in their sports. Wow. So I was lucky. right? I mean, I didn't ask for that. Just we moved there. We moved there because my dad took a job as a teacher and head coach in Gaylord from Broughton, and as I said, he moved on, so I didn't play for him. But I had wonderful coaches. Daryl Kroon, who's of Edgerton fame, the Hoosiers of Minnesota, was my basketball coach. Dave Main, who won I don't know how many 3 state championships at Gaylord in football, and then Chuck Pike, who's had numerous success. So you grow up in that environment, and that's all you know. It would never have even dawned on me that I wouldn't have played football, basketball, or baseball, because that's just the way you were programmed, And then we had the town team, and you aspired to play on the town team one day, the amateur team, and you had all these heroes. I was just back there recently for a reunion. All these heroes that were older than you, and they were actually your first heroes, right? Not the Vikings or the Twins. It was the guys that were 5, 6, 10 years older than you that you got to be the bat boy for. And I can just remember they were bigger than life to me, and to a certain extent they still are, right? You just put them up here, and so you always wanted to be that. And as you mentioned, you didn't have the burden of when I make the team. It was, can I start, or how soon can I start? And if I was king for a day, I would eliminate. I would say the most people you can have in a class is 100 kids, and we're going to make more schools so that everybody can do what they want. Because to your point, you can't do it in Eden Prairie, you can't do it in Wayzata, you can't do it at most mid to big schools. You can't play 3 sports and be in the play, And I was in a musical, I was in the choir. You can't do all those things. And if I was king for a day, I'd say we cap every school district. 100 is the most you can have at a class, so that kids can get that experience. Since you're probably not going pro anyway, just play, just participate, see what Friday Night Lights feels like,
I think we might have to come back to musical and plays, and maybe there's something we haven't seen of Maxie on TV yet.
No, there's nothing you want to see that you haven't seen.
But so sports has been obviously central to your life early on and through today. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit to May of 2020. Coming off the pandemic, all of a sudden, unfortunately, Minneapolis is kind of the center of the universe with the George Floyd's murder. And you, in the end, took to the streets to cover that story. Your reporting received great acclaim, as it should. Can you take us behind the scenes a little bit? There was reporters from all over the country, all the local stations are there. What was happening then in terms of the newsroom and sports taking a backseat and all that, and how did you end up out in the streets, and what do you take from that experience?
Well, to an extent it was the perfect storm, and here's what I mean by that. COVID, there were no sports going on, remember? All the seasons were on hold.
Right.
Baseball, football, every team, NBA had been canceled, Twins were on hold, everybody was on hold. So we were only doing really feature stories for our sports casts. So I had no responsibilities in terms of making sure the highlights got on every night because there were no highlights. So I came back from a vacation in Colorado, and while I was out there, I remember hearing about this incident. Now remember, this wasn't the first incident in Minneapolis. So when I saw it, I said, ooh, this might have some legs, but who knows? So I got back, and on Thursday of that night, after Memorial Day, we did our newscast, and I was hearing some rumblings about the 3rd precinct and this and that, and I drove home, and I turned on the TV, and we were still on the air. And I'm watching this, like everybody was, and I'm going, my God, they're burning down the 3rd precinct. And it was a camera shot about, 200 yards away, and that's all it was. And you could see people running in and out of the frame, and you saw the building burning. And that's all we knew. And at that moment, I said, if this continues, I want to know what's going on out there. And there's nobody out there. So the next morning I went in, and I went to my boss's office, Carrie Patey, and I'm a Hamlin grad, she's a Hamlin grad, and I said, Carrie, I know this is probably over now, but if it happens and you need somebody to go out there, I just want you to know I'll go. We don't know what's going to happen next, but I just want you to know if you need somebody, I'll go. Yeah. So she said, I'll take that into consideration. Well, that night, Friday night, at about 9:15, we started to get word that the protesters had shut down 35W not far from US Bank Stadium. And she was in her office still because we were all on pins and needles about what could happen next. And so she came over, she said, "Do you really want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, I really want to go." And she said, "Here's what's going on. I'll get you a photographer, go." So we went out there, and they had blocked off 35W. This was on the Friday night. And I remember they had started a fire on the freeway, and then a furniture truck came through. They stopped it, they jumped on, the protesters did, and they started throwing the furniture off the back. And this guy in the furniture truck was just happy that they let him go through eventually. This wasn't the incident that happened later, this was at night. And all at once, we're observing this, and you're trying to, it was almost a celebration and a party going on down there. And all at once, they came up the embankment, almost in sync, and I said, "What's going on? Why are you guys leaving?" They said, "We're going over to Lake Street. We're going to take down the 5th precinct now." So they gave me that intel, you know? Mm-hmm. So I called back to the TV station, and I said, "We got to get to Lake Street right now." And they said, "Stop by the station. We're going to get you some more people so they're around you. And then you can go." I said, "Here's what's going on. You need to know this. This is what's coming next." So it was kind of like, now I'm in the game. Right now you can't leave it because this story's got legs. Right. So we went over to Lake Street, and we're in an unmarked car, and we're driving up. I'll never forget. There's a lot of things I won't forget, but we're driving up, and we get by the Wells Fargo building, and there are people with 2x4s and baseball bats on the ATM machine, and they're just beating on it until finally they get through and the cash comes out. That's on fire. White Castle's on fire. We're trying to come up with a plan on the fly as to how we're going to cover this. We go around the back end, it will be the 5th precinct, and I still haven't seen any law enforcement officials. And as I'm sitting there, I look behind me, and I'll never forget this, walking in sync, here they come. And it's the police department, the sheriff's department, the highway patrol, the National Guard. They've got a plan. I didn't think they did. And they're walking in sync, in line, and I go, "Ooh, they're not going to take the 5th precinct down easy." And I look up on the roof, and there's smoke billowing, and I can see the silhouettes of guys with rifles up there. And on the other side of that, they're burning down buildings, and the protest is on. And then we thought the smoke was coming towards us, I remember, and because it was a fairly calm and really nice night, but it wasn't smoke, it was tear gas. And that was the first time I've ever been tear gassed, and it works. Yeah. It took me down to my knees. So now this whole thing is unfolding, but what people didn't see was that the vast majority of the people that were protesting were really nice, friendly, good people. So you could go out there and you could interact with them, and you could get their side of the story. Many people were there just out of curiosity. So it wasn't as threatening and life-threatening as it looked, because you'd look and you'd see in the backdrop, you'd see chaos and you'd see but I didn't feel threatened. And a lot of people knew who I was because of Channel 4, and in a crisis like that, you bond with people just out of familiarity, So I felt like I always had protection out there with with the people around me, and I started to build that, I'd say to them, "Hey, we're going to go on the air." Yeah. And then the other part of this that made this happen, as I mentioned, the perfect storm, is 5 years ago, you would have had to have gone out there with a great big van, right? You've all seen the TV vans. Well, technology now allows us to do that same live shot just with the camera. So they don't even know you're there a lot of the time. If you'd have brought a van, you couldn't have brought a van out there. You couldn't have taken that chance for safety reasons. So all these things came together and made it feasible for us to cover it. And then it just became so enthralling. It just became, we didn't know what was going to happen next. And you just go ask the question, well, why are you doing this? What set this off? What do you think? And in comes all the people from law enforcement, and still didn't know, got home about 4 in the morning that night, and still didn't know how big this story was, because you only knew what you saw. And then the next day they had they decided to have a curfew at 8 o'clock. I don't know if you remember. The other part of this was, it was beautiful weather. I don't know if you remember. Mm-hmm. It was perfect outside. No rainstorms. It was 72 degrees. It was perfect, so that it invited people out, because they'd all been in because of COVID. Nobody had anything to do. And so the next night they did on Lake Street, they had the curfew at 8 o'clock. Here they come, and people are doing a sit-in. They're sitting down. They won't leave. And here they come. Now they bring out the rubber bullets, and now things get a little bit more contentious. And we get threatened a couple times, not life-threatening, but just where it gets your attention. And so that turns into a story. And some of the images, like on Lake Street, there's a number of people who've been there. There's a number of used car dealerships on Lake Street. And we're driving by, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. There's a guy with a rifle on one side and the other side is a sawed-off shotgun in case anybody comes their way. Mm-hmm. We go over by the hospital. You don't think about this. We go by the hospital and there's tanks and things in front of the hospital because what if they decide to take over a hospital? What could happen? You forget about all these things that are going on at once that you're watching, and your adrenaline is just takes over. You know, I could have stayed up 3 straight nights, and then the next day the semi comes down Highway 35, and you think somebody's going to get killed, and that sets everything off, and then they get everybody into Bobby and Steve's, but it's happening so fast in such real time, you don't really realize how big the story is until after, nor do you know what your competitors did to cover it as well. So you don't know if you're doing anything that's different or strange, but we kept going, pushing the envelope and going further in, and we didn't really realize that we were the only ones doing that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Just, if I could, it certainly seemed, I mean, you were the talk after those days, I believe, and it seemed like you had a way to talk to people in the heart of this that nobody else did.
Well, you know, some of that comes from where our offices are, downtown Minneapolis. A lot of the people that are protesters were people that I may converse with as I walk just from A to B, right?
Sure.
And so I felt that. And then a lot of people, there was a moment there where a guy came up to me in the midst of it all. And he says, Maxie, and I go, uh-oh, what's coming up next? He says, who do you think the Timberwolves are going to draft? You know, so there was some of this levity. There was some of this, you know, a lot of sports fans and sports people that were there. And it was, but it changed my life because now I work in downtown Minneapolis, still the same place. I go outside and it's not as populated as it used to be because Target's across the street from us and they're no longer coming into work. And so you have far less people and you've got all these people. And I've learned so much because there are groups of homeless people that you see. And I always try to stop now and visit with them because they're not a threat. Now, before, I would have thought, boy, I don't know if I trust those people. Now you realize with the homeless people, they're not a threat. They've got issues, but they're not a threat. Across the street, they might say, hey, there's a drug deal going down. And that's a different deal, you know? So you learn to separate. And you learn the environment that you're in and what's really going on. So I walk the streets all the time now, and I stop and visit. And I've also learned that these people, even the drug dealers that you see with the deal going down, you can make them your friends because you're not part of their deal. And it behooves you to make them your friends in your own way, you know, because you may need to get your car one night. Sure. And so I've learned this, that you know, keep your friends close, enemies close. They're not my enemies, but they got nothing against me. So I can learn a lot about, I was just over 44th in Chicago yesterday for lunch because there's a guy over there that owns a restaurant, just turkey, and he always knows what's going on. So I sit in there and I visit with him and I find out all kinds of things about what's going on in the area, you know? And so it's completely changed my life because it's as if somebody maybe up there said, you need to see, you think you know what's going on in the city. I'm going to show you what's really going on. And it's been life-changing and fascinating, all of it. But that dialogue that you develop is probably more innate because covering sports in the inner city and living on Nicollet Mall for all those years, you're constantly interacting like that.
Sure. You know, Mike, the fact that you were out there, you're a man that's accustomed to being on the sidelines at sporting events. Now you're on the front lines in the heart of maybe the biggest story in the world at the time. And I don't even think maybe.
It was. Yeah.
Did that give you any appetite to want to move from sports over to the news side?
A lot of people ask me that, but this was such a unique one-off. Meaning, I don't know that how you'd begin to try to replicate a career of following riots. The second part of it was, I was able to maneuver because people knew who I was, because I was in Minneapolis. So if you sent me to the same situation in Seattle or Chicago or wherever, might not be as effective, and you know, nor would you know, well, over here is Lake Street and over here is the Phillips neighborhood, all that stuff. You wouldn't know. So I don't know that I necessarily graduated. I learned that I love that action, and I love that trying to find out the story, but I don't know where it would have fit, except that, in Minneapolis now several times since, the worst day was not the George Floyd riots. It was 3 months later downtown. I don't know if you recall this, but they had a suspect that they found in a car ramp. They chased him down, and on 7th and Nicollet, he took a gun and shot himself.
Yep.
Somebody yelled, the cop shot him. That was all it took. They took over downtown Minneapolis, meaning the protesters, and they came in, boom, just like, you know how quickly we can now move information with phones. And they started to take apart downtown Minneapolis. And we're on 11th and Nicollet. I'm watching right out my window. The Devil's Advocate, a restaurant across the street, they are smashing the windows. They're going in to find the safe. Britt's Pub, right over here, they're trying to burn it. The fire's starting to billow out of it, and they're coming walking through the windows. There was a man there that was cut from head to toe, still COVID, and he's sitting there, and I'm looking. Well, he's in shock. I'm looking at the window. I said, we got to go get him. He's bleeding, and he's barely moving because he's just standing there. So I went over there and worked my way through the crowd, and again, I didn't feel like people were coming after me, and somebody had taken a piece of glass and just cut him. Now, we're not supposed to have anybody in the building because it was COVID, but we brought him into the lobby. We couldn't get an ambulance because between us and the hospital was the chaos, So we had to just sit him there and calm him down and allow him to kind of, heal. He wasn't life-threatening, heal on his own, but that was the worst day. They chased us back. I mean, Ruth Chris Steakhouse, they broke into. It was the craziest day. And because of that, you always do feel a little bit like you're that close to another incident, So you are on guard all the time. So back to, would I go back in there if it happened? Absolutely. I'd go in a heartbeat if it happened again.
So it brings back a lot of memories. Hopefully, we don't need to live through that again, but you're right, it's always there. But that also has brought up that it's really important for people to have some things to follow that are not that serious. The world's turned serious, and sports is a great avenue for people to relax and to take their mind off of all the day-to-day. So for you, not long ago, we had to wait for a sports report at 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock to get games, sports and highlights and all that, and you've gone through from that to where it's now internet, smartphone. You mentioned how fast information moves, and that's true for everything. You can get it all on demand. How has that really changed your life and local sports coverage and how you work? That's
a really good question because it's what we ask ourselves every day. What is it our audience wants? And I don't think anybody's really mastered it, but the one thing that we've come back to, at least at Channel 4 for sure, is where can we find unique stories so that they stand out? Because we understand that if you really want the Twins highlights, you can get them on your phone. Okay, if I'm going to do my Twins script then that night, how can I give you something that you can't get on your phone? You can see Carlos Correa hit a home run. Can I say something like, Carlos Correa told me before the game that he's changed his batting set. What can I do so that you want to come to me to get a nugget of information? So it's changed the way we approach it because we're looking for unique stories at any level, high school, college, pro, so that you can get those from us and not from somewhere else. And then the way that I try to approach highlights, we do fewer highlights, we don't do hardly any scoreboards, and we try to give you something that's interesting about what happened in that game that night because we understand that you may have already seen it. So you don't, but we've also found that people, even if you've seen the game, heard the game, there's still something about you sit into that 10 o'clock sports game and you want to see 3 minutes of what happened today. Even if you know that Carlos Correa hit a game-winning home run, you still want to see it one more time. So it's not as if you can abandon that, but I do try to write differently to give a different appeal to it or a different take on it so that you go, well, if I'm going to decide where I watch my sports that night, if I think they're going to give me a good story that I can't get anywhere else, and if I think they're going to give me maybe some insight or opinion that I haven't heard somewhere else, that's what we're trying to develop right now. But that's a really good question because that's what we're talking about all the time right now.
Makes sense.
Mike, you've covered pro sports, collegiate sports, prep sports for decades. Do you still get excited about covering games, or is it? Has some of that enthusiasm waned a little bit over the years?
You know, Patrick, you'll appreciate this because we live so many days with the Twins in the playoffs and whatnot. I actually enjoy the spectacle of the event more than the event, meaning the build-up. I love to get to a stadium before a big game and just walk around the stadium and see what it does to people, you know? See how people get excited. See how they get to leave their lives for a minute, right? And celebrate something else and get completely involved in something else more than the game itself. Because from a reporter standpoint, I know everybody gets to see the same game, right? So I can't change that. But what is there around the periphery that's interesting, you know? And I love the way cities come to life because of sports. I love to see that vibe and how they get so involved, especially, you know, nowadays they've got access to everything so they know so much. They're well educated and they're so interactive. I just love that part of it because I think this kind of rounds out a good city or a good state, right? It gives us that other thing that we can get excited about and have fun with. That's what sports really is. And I get far more excited about doing a good story than going to a game. You know, about finding a nugget story or something that, you know, that isn't out there, something like that. I get far more excited about that than I do a game. But I always pinch myself when I go to a game because I say, you're getting paid to go to a game. So let's not complain too much about going to a game. It's just that from a professional standpoint, it's hard to make that different.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, we're down to the last minute. You're a pretty passionate outdoorsman.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You're going to be in a duck blind in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah,
would you rather be in a duck blind or would you rather be on the sidelines of a Vikings game?
That's a really good question, and that's a contingent offer. Are the Ducks flying or not? That's the answer.
And are the Vikings good?
And are the Vikings good?
Yeah.
I love being in a duck blind. I couldn't do it every day, but it's the getaway, you know, just like we all need. It frees my mind. And when I'm out in North Dakota, that's as North Dakota or the mountains of Colorado is as free as I feel. And I understand now as I get older, you need both, right? You need the sidelines and you need the place where nobody is to be happy and healthy, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, what a pleasure. You know, you and I have known each other for a long time. You're a fantastic storyteller. I could listen to you all afternoon. We used to sit around the dining room table.
We sure did.
At the Metrodome at Target Field and swap some stories.
Until Jack Bleasy told us that we had to go to the game,
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, you were a terrific co-host today.
Thanks for having me.
Really a pleasure
love it.
having you.
Thanks for coming in, Mike. It's been great to talk to you. We could talk for hours, but limited time, but it was really fantastic.
I appreciate it, guys. Keep up the great work.
Terrific. And thank all of you for watching Behind the Game. We'll see you again next month.